I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
Guys, today we're going to talk about something that we've talked about in the past. But the thing about it is Dr. Hall is constantly learning something new, like we all are, and there's a lot of stuff out there that you got to kind of filter through, and like Dr. Hall's has a lot of sense. I would say common sense, or some might call it rare sense because it's not very common. But we're going to talk about inflammation. There's things that contribute to it. There's things that can help take it away. And when I say inflammation, I don't mean the inflammation that is necessary part of the healing process. I'm talking about chronic inflammation, things that shouldn't be happening. And Dr. Hall has been constantly learning new things, and he felt that it would be best if we went over this again and just kind of shed a little bit more on this subject. Dr. Hall, what do you got for us today?
Well, we've talked about this, and it seems like every time we talk about something, we always throw in chronic inflammation because it's just everywhere. It's a constant problem for just about everybody. Mm-hmm. And it's involved in so many things, and just about every chronic disease, mm-hmm. there's a chronic systemic and inflammatory component to it.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. Autoimmune, all of them. Cardiac disease, cancer. You look under a list of inflammatory diseases, it'll say cancer, and we generally do not historically think of mm-hmm. cancer as an inflammatory disease like you do like inflammatory bowel disease or something, mm-hmm. but it's just that it's everywhere and it's involved in everything. And the problem is it affects just about everybody, mm-hmm. because for a couple of things, we're exposed to so many things in our environment. And we talked a lot about oxidative stress and antioxidants. And again, oxidative stress and inflammation they're married almost. And I mean, it's an unholy alliance too. I mean, they contribute to each other. And I'm talking about oxidative stress reactive oxygen species are good. They have purposes, but in tiny amounts at the right time. Inflammation, like you said, is good. Mm-hmm. At the right time in the right amount. But I'm talking about when we start getting the chronic oxidative stress and chronic inflammation, that's a problem, and it's a constant problem for everybody. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the other things that contributes to both are the foods that we eat. And I think most of us will agree that as a general rule in our society, we eat lousy foods. Mm-hmm. It's so easy. Mm-hmm. For one thing, they taste better than healthy foods. Right. And we're just doggone it. Mm-hmm. I know I shouldn't eat this, but I want to, and I'm going to do it. And it's handy. Yeah. It's easy to get in the car, go and get a fast food instead of mm-hmm. taking the time to prepare mm-hmm. healthful foods if you can find them. Mm-hmm. And finding good foods is hard. Yeah. So anyway. But they are out there, and there are things that we can do. But anyway, it still, I think, behooves us if we can reduce the exposure to things. If we can just reduce things a little bit, that's going to help. Yeah. And do a little bit of the things that are good for us, that can help. And that's where I'm going. Very few of us are going to completely overhaul our lifestyle, but we can make some changes that can make a difference. So. And I'm going to go, usually I would talk about the foods that cause inflammation and the foods and then talk about anti-inflammatory. I'm kind of going to go backwards. I'm going to finish up, I think today, talking about foods that we really ought to avoid and focus on that today.
That's good.
So there are, and what are the foods that are good for us? Well, as I say all the time, they're the foods that are good for us.
Mm, right.
The fruits and vegetables and all the different colors of the fruits and vegetables. Mm-hmm. The greens, leafy green vegetables, and the reds and the oranges and all that, orange colored vegetables, and the fruits and the natural fruits, mm-hmm. not fruit juice that you buy in a jar or in, whatever. Right. So, and even meats. I mean, meats have a bad reputation, but they're out there for a purpose too. And if you eat a little bit of them and eat the right ones, they can really do a good job for you too.
Oh, definitely.
And but the problem is I mean, most people are like me. I'm more of a carnivore than I am an herbivore. I mean, I'm a meat and potatoes kind of a guy, and mostly meat is what I like. I want meat at every meal. Well, I don't do that because I shouldn't, but I want to.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I want the fried foods. I always said you got to have your RDA of fried, because that's what I grew up on, and I love fried. Well, fried's not good for you, doggone it. It just isn't. So so I like my fried chicken. Fried chicken's number one. That is at the top of Mount Olympus for old John Boyd. That's my number one food. But anything fried okra, so whatever. So the foods that taste really good are the ones that are really bad for us. And one of the things they do is they contribute to inflammation. So the good foods, the leafy green the vegetables and all that, and they actually have, all the good foods have chemicals in them. They have nutrients in them. It's interesting I say chemicals. A lot of people, it's interesting how people in the public think of the word chemical. They tend to think of chemical as a negative.
Yeah.
Because they were thinking about synthetic chemicals and toxic chemicals and well, everything's a chemical, except light. If you want to think of light as a electromagnetic wave, or a photon or something, but everything else is a chemical. I mean, we're made of chemicals. Air's chemical, water's a chemical, everything's a chemical, nutrients are chemicals, food's chemical. So I don't think of it like that. I have to remind myself that some people think negative. But anyway, they have nutrients or chemicals in them that are good for us, that do the things that they were designed to do to help, one of which is to help overcome inflammation. Because inflammation is supposed to happen, but then it's supposed to stop at the right time. And for the body to resolve inflammation, it has to have the right nutrients so that it can work. For you to work on a car or a truck or something, you can't do it with sand, sand and some wheat kernels. And, you gotta have some tools.
That's right.
You gotta have the materials with which to work, and so does the body. It's just as logical can be. And so the problem is the diets that we're eating, we're not getting besides getting bad stuff, we're not getting the good stuff.
Right.
Enough of it.
Right.
So anyway, and we'll take anti-inflammatory drugs to take care of inflammation. Well, the problem with that is they're making the body stop doing things like non-steroidals, NSAIDs like ibuprofen or aspirin, or one of those, Advil is ibuprofen. Well, they're COX-2 inhibitors. They're inhibiting an enzyme that's there for a reason.
Right.
And it does help reduce inflammation, but you're also stopping the body from doing things it's supposed to do. One of which is to actually resolve inflammation at the right time, when the body's finished with inflammation. So anyway, we use drugs, and drugs, there's almost always a price to pay, or prices to pay when we're taking drugs.
Yeah.
So that's not, if we need it, sometimes we need it to get over the hump. I don't mind taking a little ibuprofen to get me over the hump if I need to kind of break that cycle a little bit.
Yeah.
And then get off of them as quickly as you can, and then eat the right foods and all, and stop doing the things that contribute to it. So there are a lot of foods, and there are a lot of nutrients. Curcumin is one of the most commonly studied nutrients. It's found in turmeric and other plants too, but there are a lot of studies done with that. But we're not big on taking individual nutrients around here. We're big on whole foods, because because when you extract a nutrient and then concentrate it and put it in a capsule, or just put it in liquid in a jar or whatever and sell it, you're basically making a drug, because you're taking a single molecule. That's what we do with drugs. We get a single molecule, we refine it, and purify it if we can, and then we concentrate it, and then we take that. And sometimes that's good if you're taking an antibiotic that can help you overcome an infection before you die. That's
pretty necessary.
But food, when it comes to food, that's not a great way, because the way God made foods with thousands of nutrients in them, in the right proportion, and they tend to work together to protect the plant from assault. And plants need oxidative relief. They need antioxidants too. Those antioxidants, because they're under oxidative stress too, by the way.
Sure.
So those nutrients that we use are also there for the plant's benefit too, and that's common sense, but a lot of times we don't think of it like that. But anyway, they're there in the right, and so they help the plant survive, but they also are there to be food for us, and so we need to get all those nutrients in the right amounts and the right ratios. So, we know that looking at certain nutrients, that certain things have anti-inflammatory effects, like curcumin, and lots of other, the phenols, polyphenols, and so the things that are in coffee, the things that are in green tea, and drinks like that, and certain carotenoids that we find in vegetables. So there are a lot of different chemicals.
Carotenoid. I have not heard it like that. I guess it's because of the vegetable carrot. I always call it carotenoid.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
Me being hooked on phonics, I guess.
You can pronounce it any way you want.
Okay.
So, but anyway, I think it really is carotenoids. I think
Sounds good to me.
that's okay.
Yep.
If you say carotenoids, people are going to know what you're talking about. So as long as it communicates, that's the main thing. So, and there are a lot of things. So the bottom line on that is the foods that are good for us, and we know what they are. They're good for inflammation too. They just are, and if you're going to see antioxidant effect and anti-inflammatory effect, they just go hand in hand. So we're always going to talk about both when we're talking about one or the other, because they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the foods that contribute to inflammation, because that's what if we just avoid a lot of those, that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Just avoid some of those. And our producer over here is grinning at me like I don't know, do I have something?
No,
on my face?
you're doing just fine.
Okay.
You're doing just fine.
Well, okay. Maybe she saw a picture of my twin brother and thought, there can't be two people that look just like that. The world's not right. I don't know what she saw. Anyway, okay, so we know processed foods. So the foods that are bad for us, the processed foods. And in the society in which we live, we got to have it, because we're not an agrarian society anymore. We don't each of us have our own little garden, our own farm, and we grow our own foods. We just don't do that anymore. We can't. I mean, we live in the middle of almost 8 million people here in the Metroplex in Dallas-Fort Worth. That we can't do that. It just doesn't work that way. So we have to have foods that are processed and preserved and all that. But we want to try to eat as fresh as we can. I mean, it's hard. And the point is, it's hard to escape it completely. And sometimes you just have to have it that way. But the refined carbohydrates, the refined sugars, the refined flour, anything that's refined and all the nutrients have been taken away from it, is bad. And the thing about what refined carbohydrates do, carbohydrate, by the way, there are synonyms for carbohydrate. Sugar, or saccharide, or polysaccharide. A lot of people don't understand that carbohydrate is the same as a sugar is the same. They think it's totally something. So just so you know, if you're saying carbohydrate, you're saying sugar, you're saying saccharide, they're all the same thing. So sometimes you'll hear me say carbohydrate, sometimes you'll hear me say sugars. I'm talking about the same stuff. Okay. So with a high glycemic index, foods that cause a high glycemic index, that just means there's a higher amount of glucose basically in your blood than there should be. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're diabetic. It just means that you walk around and you're eating foods that are causing high glycemic index causes a production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Cytokines are chemicals that are produced like with immune cells, like monocytes, macrophages, and other cells, and they're used as chemical messengers. So, but they're pro-inflammatory. They're messengers that cause the body to produce inflammation, because there's time for inflammation, like we say. So interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, a lot of different cytokines out there that are produced, and they contribute to the production or overproduction of inflammation, and that's when we're eating foods, and a bunch of glucose in the bloodstream does that, and so refined carbohydrates do that. While I mention it, carbohydrates, and I'm talking refined carbohydrates. Carbohydrates we need carbohydrates. There are bad carbohydrates, there are good carbohydrates. Now, to me, we still ought to not get carried away with carbohydrates. But there's a study, and I just found this morning actually, but they did a study showing that. So they did a 28-day study with people who were overweight, and they had a group eat the same amount of carbohydrates. If you measured the calories and the amount of carbohydrates were the same, but they were different carbohydrates. They had one group that ate the highly refined carbohydrates. They had another group that ate things like lentils, pinto beans, things like that, that have the same amount of carbohydrate, but they have the glycemic load is like a fraction of what's caused by the others, and they were significantly reduced glycemic load and significant reduction in inflammation after 28 days of eating the same amount of carbohydrates but different carbohydrates. So lentils, beans, things that we generally think of as good for us, they are, but they have carbohydrate in them, but they're not, but it's different. And so that's important to understand. So whole grains is okay. When we buy bread, we buy whole grain bread, and we don't buy white bread. We still need to not get carried away with, I don't eat a lot of bread. I'm not a bread person anyway, but you don't want to eat a lot of bread, but if you do, then eat the whole grain. Legumes. So, beans and pinto beans and lentils, even milk, it says, and fruits. Fruits, fruits, apples, oranges, grapes, and all that, those are good for us. They can contribute to reduction of inflammation. Now, eating a certain amount, you can overdo that, because you can still eat a lot of those, and not dried either. When they're dried, that's a high sugar content, and you're getting, for the same amount, you're getting a lot. So fresh fruits in their normal, in the way you find them off the tree or whatever, and those are really good. So apples, oranges, grapefruits, pears, all of those are good, and they can help with inflammation. Okay, I'm going to say something. Red meat has a bad reputation. Well, we eat too much. But a little bit of red meat, and it's not the red meat, it's the stuff in it. It's the preservatives, it's the hormones that they've injected into cattle or whatever. Those are the things that are the big problems with all the diseases that they associate with, like cancer and other things. It's not the meat itself. Especially if you have, and I'm going to go ahead and say grass-fed versus grain-fed, and you eat a reasonable amount of red meat, that's good for you. Actually, it's good for you. In fact, they've shown that people who eat red meat have less colon cancer than vegetarians do. The cancer rate for vegetarians overall is a little bit less, but colon cancer, if you eat some red meat, the people that eat meat in reasonable amounts versus vegetarians, they have less colon cancer. So that's something to be aware of. That tells you something. It's the stuff. So you want to try to find, grass-fed meat that hasn't been hasn't the animals weren't injected with all kinds of stuff or
Right.
fed all kinds of stuff. That's hard to do, but it's something to be aware of. And even the fatty acids, the trans fats and all that. Trans fats are a problem, but they're not as big. A little bit of that is okay. We don't need to eliminate trans fats. We like the cis fats, they're shaped a little bit different. The same fatty acids, but the way they're shaped makes a difference on how they're metabolized. But trans is harder to metabolize, and so it stays in there longer, and then it clogs arteries and all that. But they still have a purpose, and they can. So a little bit is fine. So you don't need to eliminate red meat, but you want to try to eat a little bit, but try to find it where it hasn't been subjected to all kinds of stuff that we generally find it in. One of the things, though, that they can do when you're getting the wrong ones, when you're eating the wrong kinds, and I want a little bit of science here. They're increasing inflammatory cytokines. They're activating toll-like receptors, which are protein receptors on the cell membranes of immune cells, like macrophages and all that. And they stimulate inflammation because that's one of the first things that the immune system does when it's responding to some insult. It starts inflammation. It's an important part of the immune response. But you want to happen when it's supposed to happen, not just happen because you ate the wrong foods. So they understand a lot of what's happening. So they're stimulating toll-like receptors, which are important, but they're supposed to be responding to toll-like receptors are supposed to be responding to bacteria or virus or something to let the immune system know, hey, I need to get rid of this thing. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create some inflammation and then move on. Okay, now another thing. Now this is going to get interesting, I think, because I think a lot of people are aware of omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. And so you'll find there are products out there they're loading you up with omega-3 fatty acids because omega-6 fatty acids are supposedly pro-inflammatory and omega-3 are anti-inflammatory. And so you get fish oil. I was just talking to a lady a few minutes ago. She's taking a lot of fish oil. I'm not big on that. Fish, if you can get fish that are healthy and they're not loaded with toxins, that's fine, but just loading up on fish oil that's loaded with omega-3, we know that's not, and you're not going to hear this very often, but there's enough studies to show that's not good for you. And the omega-6 aren't bad for you. They're also, omega-6s can stimulate inflammation, but they also are anti-inflammatory too, depending on the situation. And so we need omega-6s as well as omega-3s in the right ratios. And you know how you get that? You get it by eating the food, not just extracting omega-3s and loading up on the oil. So I'm not big on fish oil at all. I would recommend don't take products that are just, you're loading up on omega-3s. We know that when you get out of balance on almost anything, you got problems, and so that's something to be aware. And there are enough studies now are showing that. So omega-6s are good, and you find omega-6s in corn oil, soybean, safflower oil, and all that. And we used to say those were good ones to use, and then now lately there's don't use that, but no, they're in there, and so. Again, you don't want to get carried away with all that, but a little bit. So eating a little bit of corn, or even using it in cooking, you got to kind of be careful on how you're using it. But those have omega-6s. Omega-6s. The deal is omega-6s. They have linolenic acid. They have a certain fatty acid in it that can be converted to arachidonic acid, which is involved in creating the inflammatory response. So they're saying, and omega-3s don't. So they're saying, oh my gosh, we shouldn't be taking. It was an assumption that was made because they see that it can stimulate the formation of linolenic acid and then arachidonic acid. What they're finding is that just very little of that's going on with omega-6s. It's not happening. And so it was just an assumption that was made, and it becomes dogma, and it's not based on science. The science is showing that omega-6s are good, but you need the right ratios, and you find the right ratios in the right foods. That's still the best way to do it, is eat the right foods, not just go to the store and buy something that has one particular nutrient in it. That's just almost always a problem.
Yep.
So anyway, that's something to be aware of. Okay, here, omega-6 fats are not only safe, they're beneficial for the heart and circulation. That's some of the latest research and all that. So they're good, it's there for a reason. It's good for us. Also found in sunflower seeds, walnuts, pumpkin seeds, and things like that. So, again, we tend to think of a little bit of those are good for you anyway. They're good for you for one reason, they got omega-6s in it. Okay, so we've already talked about that there's a deal on sugar and high fructose. That's really carbohydrate, because we're talking sugar and carbohydrates. Alcohol is a problem. Excessive alcohol contributes to inflammation. We think of the liver, obviously, but so I mean, we already know you shouldn't drink excessive alcohol, but some people get a little bit, and a little carried away. A little bit every day is okay, but and I don't mean, but you don't have to be getting to the point where you're getting drunk every day to be causing problems. So alcohol impairs the central nervous system. We know that. Well, the central nervous system is involved in regulating inflammation. Guess what? And then also it's causing a gut dysbiosis. We talk about that all the time. The bacterial colonies and populations in the gut, when they get imbalanced, well, then it screws up the immune response, and the automatic thing is inflammation. Always. So the alcohol does that, and it's obviously affecting liver too. So that's it. But it's some of the same things that we talk about with other things is what alcohol does. Plus, affecting the CNS, the central nervous system, and specifically the brain, is interfering with proper immune and inflammatory response. Okay, I'm going to finish with, and I think people are seeing this some, but they're going to hear about more advanced glycation end products. Have you heard of glycation end products? Oh, you haven't? Okay. Well, I thought by now y'all had probably heard of that. You're going to hear about it more all the time. That's one of the problems with cooking at high temperatures and frying things. And
Yes, I have heard of that.
Yeah,
I just didn't know the name of it.
Yeah.
Now,
okay, and what's happening is they're creating these products. Well, glycation, glyco means sugar, means sweet, but we use it for sugar. So we have glycoproteins, we have glycolipids, and glycoproteins are important. Most proteins are glycoproteins, as it turns out. We didn't know that when I was in school. We just thought they were just amino acids. And we knew there might be a sugar, but we didn't know that most proteins are glycoproteins. And it's the sugar part that really does most of the work, as it turns out. When I took immunology in 1974, an antibody was a protein. Well, now we know it's a glycoprotein. It's the sugar component that does most of the work. And without the sugar, it ain't gonna work. But it's just that carbohydrate chemistry is harder, and it's always lagged behind protein chemistry and all that. So we're learning these things. Well, glycation is talking about sugar end products, okay? Sugars that are being attached to different things. So there's glycosylation and there's glycation. Glycosylation is a normal product. It's an enzymatic product by which sugars are attached to proteins to make them glycoproteins, like antibodies. That's an enzymatic reaction. Whenever you see an enzyme, that's a pretty good clue it's supposed to happen, because God gave us an enzyme for that process to happen, okay? Glycation is not an enzymatic process, which also gives you kind of a clue. It's where sugars are attached to these products, but they're not supposed to be. They're attached because the high temperature forced it to happen or whatever. So a good example of a glycosylated protein is an antibody. A good example of a glycated protein is hemoglobin. Everybody has heard of hemoglobin A1C with diabetics. Hemoglobin carries oxygen from the bloodstream, from the lungs to through the bloodstream to the cells, and then it collects carbon dioxide and carries it back. So hemoglobin binds oxygen, also binds on different parts of the molecule. It binds carbon dioxide. Hemoglobin is not a glycoprotein, it's just a protein. It's got amino acids, it also has some heme, it's got some iron in it and all that, but it doesn't have a sugar component. It's not supposed to have a sugar component. But diabetics, but we do. We have some hemoglobin A1C, all of us do. It's not supposed to be there, but we have a little bit, all that. Unfortunately, diabetics, because they have more glucose, they tend to have a higher level. So they use A1C levels of a glycated, and you look and then sometimes it'll say it's glycosylated hemoglobin. It really isn't, it's glycated, because it's not supposed to be that way. Not supposed to have glycated hemoglobin, but we do. And you want to keep it as low as you can, because that gives you an idea. It's just a measure of how you're doing as far as controlling the glucose in your blood. But that's what hemoglobin A1C is. It's a glycated protein, and it's not supposed to be there. It's not the way it is. Well, glycation end products are the result of improper cooking and all kinds of stuff. And that's one, at least what we're talking about. And they stimulate the production of inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor, C-reactive proteins and all that are also involved. And, so that's the problem with cooking with my fried foods. Oh man, what a bummer. So glycated end products, glycation end products. So that's something that you need to be aware of. So that's the problem with all that cooking it the way we do in high temperatures and all that. Food additives and preservatives and all that, monosodium glutamate, I think everybody is aware of MSG. You just want the artificial sweeteners. They're just not good for us. They cause problems, and anything that's synthetic is usually, it may not be a big problem, but it's not good for us, and sometimes they can be a problem. So, it's really better to use sugar if you're going to sweeten your tea, and use a little bit, but we use the artificial sweeteners and all that. You hear about sodium nitrate, sodium nitrites, and things like that. So there are all kinds of things in our foods or in the way we process or cook foods that contribute to inflammation. So just eliminating those things, and I say eliminate, reducing them. This is real world. We're not going to eliminate stuff, but if we can reduce those things, try to eat the good foods. Try to reduce the amount of bad foods that we eat, and we can do that. We can do that. I can do that. Anybody can do that. But being aware of it is the main thing. But boy, inflammation is a problem. It is a major problem. All of our chronic diseases have an inflammatory. Everyone has an inflammatory. Also, they now say that has an oxidative stress component. But inflammation is a major contributor to almost all of our chronic diseases, including cancer and things like that. So anything that we can do to help reduce that, and our diets are really fairly easy to do if we just think about it and pay attention and care enough about ourselves to do the right things and not do the wrong thing. Eliminate the stupid stuff. I always say eliminate the stupid stuff. And I'm talking to myself, looking in the mirror.
Sure.
Reduce the stupid stuff, and try to do the right things too, and get the right foods in us. That can make a huge difference in our lives, and in our health. And we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our families, we owe it to everybody to be as healthy as we can be.
Sure.
And these are easy things that we can address for chronic inflammation.
No, sounds good, Dr. Hall. Well, guys, that was a lot of information.
Yeah.
That was a whole lot of information, but it was good information. And one thing that it all comes back to is refinement. Don't eat refined things, because when we refine things, that's when we have a problem. Like Dr. Hall said, some omega-6s are good, some omega-3s are good, but when we sit here and refine and concentrate these things, we have a problem. When we refine these oils that he's talking about, we have a problem. When we refine our sugars, guess what? We're concentrating the amount of carbohydrates as far as energy goes there. And we're getting rid of all those other things that contribute to the processes of the body. That's where the big problem is. We want to eat whole foods. We don't want to just concentrate things because we just end up causing a big problem. These things are made to work as a whole, not separate. We sit there and take all of the oil out of corn, well, now we got a problem. But if we eat some corn and it has some omega-6s in it in its whole form, that's when it's good for us. Whenever we take all of the oil out of soybeans, have some kind of soy oil or whatever, that's not good for you. When we take it all out of anything, that's when we have a problem. We eat it as a whole. That's when it's good for us. I mean, the great example right there was Dr. Hall mentioned that the beans, eating the same amount of carbohydrates in the beans versus a refined situation had a total different effect on our blood sugar. Well, why is that? Well, one of them, we've concentrated the amount of sugar that's in it into a smaller package to where our body takes it in immediately. But when we eat it in a whole bean or legume or something like Dr. Hall said, well, at that point, what we're doing is we're taking it in slower. We're not spiking that insulin. We're not spiking that blood sugar. We're not creating a condition to where our A1C is going to go up. We're eating it whole, like God intended. Like so many times you just hear this, oh, anti-inflammation, blah, blah, blah. Well, anti-inflammatories work by getting rid of it, like Dr. Hall, he actually told you how it works. But it takes all the inflammation away. But when you do it naturally, let's say like in turmeric, you know, when you take the turmeric, then your body uses that turmeric and knows, hey, I need some inflammation now to start the healing process. Okay, now I need to take it away. Not just forcing the issue by taking an anti-inflammatory. That's how the body is meant to work. It's meant to work with a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and it comes together and makes a great thing happen. Guys, we know there's a lot of information. Please just listen to it. You might want to listen to it 2 or 3 times to catch it all. But guys, this was some good information. Dr. Hall's learning more every day. He's actually been studying a lot on antioxidants and inflammation and things like that right now. So there's no telling. We may come with another video next week talking about the same thing. But it'll be more information that Dr. Hall has learned. And some of it may be contradictory. You never know. I mean, we learn new things all the time. You know, and those are, you know, it happens. You know, and the biggest problem is, as human beings, we always want to look for that one thing, that fountain of youth, or that one, and it's not one thing. And we constantly are doing it by sucking all the good stuff out of the food and concentrate on one thing. Because it's got to be this one thing, right? It's not. It all works together, and that's the key. Guys, until next time, I'm Sean McAnally.
John Hall.
And this is For the Health of It.